Hi, I'm Scott with Chief Architect. Today, we're going to look at an as-built measurement process. I have Al Fry with me, and he is a professional remodeler. He's been in the industry for over 30 years, and more recently, he's been focusing on as-builts. And Al, maybe share a little bit with us how long you've been working in the industry with the as-builts and what you've been doing in the area.
Well, I started in construction in 1975, basically, and I've been doing as-builts since about 2005. So do the math.
Okay, a couple of years.
Couple of years.
Couple of years. And so more recently you hire out for building professionals in the San Francisco area, and you go out on job site and you do the as-built measurements over
That is correct.
Over the course of several hours on your projects.
That's right.
And so today we're going to leverage Al's knowledge in measuring the room that you see here for an accessory dwelling unit. And the idea is to measure it up, and the intent is to put a bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, living space for mother-in-law quarters or potentially even a rental unit. So let's begin by talking about the tools that Al uses in the as-built measurement process. Al, walk us through your tool set.
Sure,
here.
Scott. Well, first off, I guess we can start with the computer. I don't typically use paper sketches anymore. Everything goes directly into the computer. With the program, it's very easy to generate the model. You really don't need those sketches, and it's an easy double check. We'll talk about the computer in a couple of minutes. I have laid out here the tools that I use. Typically, I'm using a laser measure. This happens to be a Leica. It's a 7500i. It's a little more expensive, but there's some good memory capability in here as far as recalling if you want to use Bluetooth. This thing tends to eat some power, so have extra batteries if you're going to use that. Flash drive. This is an electronic level. If you use this on sloped ceilings, you can get an exact read of the pitch. It'll read pitch and degrees, so you just have to either eyeball it or put it up on the ceiling, and you get an exact reading on the slope. Tape measure is still valid. There are a lot of instances when you need the tape, especially if you're doing windows and doors. Windows sometimes have treatments on them, and the laser just can't get the appropriate target. A camera. It can be your iPhone, it can be another type of camera, whatever. And then obviously pencil and paper. The computer, whatever minimum is required to run the system, this is a little more high-powered because I use this in my business, and I need to show people renderings and things like this that require the extra power.
Great. And it looks like you got a bag here. You haul all that around.
Yep.
And also you've got booties, so you don't...
A lot of my customers like to have shoes taken off when you measure the house.
Al, a lot of people that measure as-builts go out and they'll take a pad of paper and sketch it out and put their dimensions in. Help us understand why you're using Chief Architect actually on a laptop here in the field instead of doing your sketching.
The sketching I found to be less accurate.
Okay.
And that's one of the things that I offer is an accurate workup of the building, structure, whatever it is that we're doing. When I use the program, it allows me to really zero in on wall thicknesses and types and ceiling heights and things like this. So I'm actually building the model as I'm working.
So you're focusing on accuracy
Right.
over maybe speed, and you may have to skip a few dimensions when you sketch it out, and when you get back to the office, maybe you don't have as much information to have a complete model, and you've saved yourself maybe a trip to go back out and,
That's right.
and capture
Typically
some
what I've run into is that you get your dimensions, and then when you get it back and start drawing, things don't work out.
Okay.
And you have to go back and double check something.
Okay.
And you can eliminate that if you're on the computer immediately.
Okay.
And it's not that much slower.
Yeah. So you're running a laptop. Some folks run maybe one of these Microsoft Surfaces or
Doesn't matter.
another laptop. Okay, great. Well, we're on site here. We're going to do your initial walk around, and let's talk about what you do when you arrive on the job site.
The first thing I'm going to do is a quick inspection. I'm going to take a walk around the building, whatever it is that we're measuring, and just get the general lay of the building. As I'm walking around, I'm looking for things like jam thicknesses on doors and windows. I'm looking for ceiling heights, anything that's a little out of the ordinary. In this room, there's a lot of can lights. I'd be interested in how those are switched and from where. Heating registers, whether or not those things are zoned. Specifically, I'm looking for wall thicknesses at this point, though, because I'm
Okay.
going to be defining wall types when I actually get into the program.
Okay. Will you be looking for some stationary things, maybe a gas line input or water source?
Anything that's permanent in the house is what I'm looking for.
Okay.
If it's permanent with the structure, that's going to get included.
Okay, Al, let's walk around and talk us through your approach in assessing the room that we have here.
Okay, Scott. So the first thing I want to be looking at is the window jambs. I'm just going to start over here and just going to work around the room. And I'll just take a little walk. And what I'm interested in is the thickness here. So I have a tape with me and I'm looking at this and I'm thinking this is probably a 2x6 wall based on the jamb thickness.
Okay.
So all the exterior walls here look like they're 2x6. I can also confirm that over here with the door. So if I open this and just measure the jamb looks like it's about total thickness probably about 6.5. It's exactly what I would expect with a 2x6 wall. So
Okay, that's an easy way to measure.
that's an easy way to measure, an easy way to look. I'm seeing some issues with the walls over here. I'm seeing issues with the walls over here as far as a cut down. We'll take that into account as well.
Okay.
This obviously is a 2x6 wall. There's no door, so it's
Yeah, that one's
there's
more
the
obvious
stud.
in
That's
this
obvious. Okay, we have a wall, intermediate wall here between these two areas.
Right.
And I can determine the thickness of that simply by measuring distances from one side to the other and then getting the thickness of the wall
Okay.
that's going in between here.
Okay, so nothing fancy there. in
Nothing
that case.
fancy. Over here, we have a staircase going up and we have a crawl space access here. So now I can determine the back side of this wall, what structure there is here. So if I take a peek back here,
Yep.
well, that's sheetrock as well. So now I'm going to have to use a little trick. This is about 18 3/4. So the wall is about there. So this says that that is a pretty heavy wall. It's about 11 inches.
Okay.
And I might look in here and I can see some concrete in here. So I know that this particular wall stops right about here, concrete below, sheetrock above. This is probably furred out.
Mm-hmm.
So
when you're measuring your wall thickness and you have an unknown like that, you just simply take the tape measure and do the math on the difference of the wall.
That's right.
And that's a quick way to do it.
That's the easiest way.
Now there is a wall that divides the stairwell and this closet alcove here. How would you go about that? Same way?
Same way. Come
Same
from
process?
the inside and then bring the tape around on the outside, measure back over, locate this area, and then bring the tape back and get the thickness of the wall.
Well, that sounds pretty easy.
It's all about points of reference.
Okay.
All right. The other thing I'm looking at is the offset in this ceiling.
Uh-huh.
Notice this wall is not in line with this one.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay? So I'm seeing that offset as I'm doing my inspection. And I know that I'm going to have an offset there.
Okay.
I can expect one. Okay, the next is the ceiling heights. And that's obviously just put a tape on it or use your laser, put it on the floor, and measure up. In here, it looks fairly consistent. Some areas might be there might be a raised coffer or a tray. It might even be sloped. If I get a sloped ceiling, then I typically will measure the low side of the slope, finished, and if I can, the high side.
Right.
But if I can't get the high side's measurement, then I'll use my level and just come over here and see if I can get the slope.
Right. So the floor here is on slab. What if this floor is not on the level? Maybe it's sloped for whatever reason. Maybe it was an older structure and it was maybe a garage even. How would you manage that when you put it into Chief Architect software?
In the program, I'm going to use the tallest dimension.
Okay.
Okay, and then I'll work back up from there.
Uh-huh. Would you put a call out then in text that says
Absolutely.
quarter-inch slope or
Yes.
whatever you determine?
That's what I'm going to be doing.
Okay.
I'm going to be using the call out and put a text item in there just as a note so that I know what's going on. If I have to model it, I can do it.
Okay.
But typically, I don't.
Okay.
It's just a waste.
Okay.
So,
You'd mentioned earlier about the can lighting and the heat registers and air returns in the ceiling, and if they're zoned. How do you go about that process?
you simply go around and operate the system. Throw some switches and see what goes on and off.
Okay.
That's all you have to do. Whether it's zoned is going to be right there. That thermostat is going to be telling me things like that.
Okay.
I'll be taking some photographs as I go through this as well. So I take pictures of everything that I can see here. Walls, every wall will have its own photo, and then I'll get close-ups of the thermostats and maybe some of the multiple light switches. And is that an alarm system over there that I'm looking at by the door?
Yeah, that's an alarm system over there.
That, and then the intercom, and a lot of the heat registers, some of the ceiling things. Where you stand when you take the picture is important, because like right here, I'm looking down this line of lights, and I notice that there's one or two of them that aren't quite in alignment. And so I'll be noting stuff like that. They also have different bulbs in them, it appears anyway. So that kind of thing gets noted. Is that a sprinkler in the ceiling down there? Or a smoke detector of some type?
That should be a smoke detector.
Okay, so that'll be noted.
Okay.
So we have fans. We have what appears to be a fan here. Some other lights.
Water source coming in.
Water source coming in.
Sewer access.
Okay. And that's going to be noted on the plan as well, because this is a slab, and if something has to happen as far as relocating that, we're going to want to know about that.
Yeah. Now, for the detail on the electrical, obviously there's a lot of switches in here that are controlling the zones of the lights. Will you go into the level of detail in your plan process to put the electrical switches? There's going to be some walls added in here. And will you actually dimension those switches so that it's known when you add the walls in?
That is part of the service, but it's an extra fee.
Okay.
All right. To get into that level of detail is typically an extra fee. I will note where the lights are, but actually establishing the circuitry is something that I don't typically do.
Yeah, yeah. But that'd be easy to do if you put the switches in, run your dimensions, and then it could be laid
Yes.
out when the guys come in
And
here
a lot of
nail up
times
the
it's
walls.
not really necessary to really run dimensions on the switches, as it is a general location is good enough.
Yeah.
If I get it within 6 inches or so, we're going to know that the switch or plugs are on studs. So,
Yeah, right.
and in this particular instance where the room isn't finished, we can clearly see where those studs are. So,
Yeah, a little easier.
yeah, when you have the nails sitting here,
Yeah.
so
Okay.
or screws.
Is that it for the walkthrough?
Pretty much.
Okay.
There isn't a whole lot here. If there were changes in the floor, like a step down or a step up, I'd be noting that. Same with the ceiling, but it looks pretty straightforward.
Okay. What's next?
Next is to get busy with the computer.
Okay. Well, let's go over and take a look. All right. Thanks for that walkthrough, Al. You're now ready to start drawing some of the elements in the room. And can you walk us through a little bit about the configuration you use with Chief Architect for your productivity tips?
Sure. Right here we have the default screen for Chief, and this is what most of the users are going to see. What I'm interested in is increasing the efficiency of the system. I want to be fast. I want to be efficient. I don't want to have to be hunting through tools to find what I need. So the first thing that I do is change the toolbars.
Okay.
All right? Don't freak out. Okay? Because when you see this, so I'm going to switch over to my standard tools that I use, and we'll go over here to toolbar configurations, and this is a pre-built configuration that I use for as-built projects. And as you can see, I have quite a number of tools out here. There's a purpose for all of this. I have a number of fixtures that are used all the time
Okay.
in all of these, and Also, there's a setup in here where the dimensions are set to go to surfaces, temporary dimensions are set to run surfaces, and when I do windows, it's going to go to the surface of drywall rather than to stud, because that's what I measure.
So all of your defaults you've pre-configured in this as-built toolbar and in your dimension defaults to make it ideal when you measure the
That's right.
as-built conditions.
And when you open Chief to do an as-built, if you create a template file, then all your defaults for your dimensions, wherever they're going to be, comes in.
Uh-huh. And then as you mouse over these icons up at the top up here, these are frequently used elements that you've pre-configured on your toolbar?
Yes, there's a tool in the toolbar called Place Library Objects. So what it does is it gives you quick access to anything that's in the library by one button.
Okay.
So all I have to do is click that and put the toilet in.
So it looks like frequently used items, maybe toilet, sink, looks
Bathtubs.
like washer, dryer,
That's right.
shower, cook hood.
Mm-hmm.
You've just added those onto your toolbar, and this is a custom toolbar configuration that you can toggle on and toggle off, and it makes it a faster process when you go out into the field
Right.
and
If
start
I
your
want
as-builts.
something, I can just click and go.
Okay. Well, there are a lot of tools on there. Let's see how you get started with this room.
Okay. Well, with this room, I know that the walls are going to be 2x6. I can see that it's a siding, so I'm going to set up the wall type for the exterior as a siding 6 wall.
Okay.
I'll worry about the actual size of the material shortly. That doesn't have to be done right this minute.
Okay.
Okay. So the first thing that I'm going to do is just draw the rough outline and the shape of the building as I see it from this point. So I'm going to start by double-clicking my primary wall tool and going into the wall types and confirming that I have a siding 6 wall. And then I'm just going to start drawing. So I'm come down here, like that, and then across, out. I'm just roughing in the general shape at this point.
So you're just looking at the shape of the structure. You're not worrying about the dimensions at this
Not
point.
right now. Okay. And that's pretty much the exterior. Now, on the inside walls, I'm going to use an interior wall. And if you double-click the tool, you can get into the defaults. And I'm going to use an interior 6 wall for this. And I'm looking at what I have to work with and just drawing in. We have a staircase going up here. Move my drawing down. There's going to be the staircase opening here. I'm just going to rough this in. This
No
is
need to
coming
draw
back
the whole
down.
staircase in this case.
I would probably draw this back a bit further,
Okay.
but it's really not necessary. And we start with something like this.
All right. So you have the shape. That's
so I
pretty
have
quick.
the shape. Now, when you're doing something like this, you never want to lose what you're doing, so you always save your work. And what the saving method that I'm using is going to be stepping up the name of the file. So if I, for instance, if this is an as-built, I'll say this is as-built 1, then I'll go to as-built 2, as-built 3, and I just step it up and I create essentially what is a manual archive.
Yeah. Now, this is an easier room to measure because there's really no interior walls. It was pretty easy for you to figure out what the shell of this looks like.
Mm-hmm.
In the condition where you have a number of interior rooms, what's your process in creating the shape of the structure in that sort of a situation?
If I have something where there are those interior partitions, I'll draw the outside as I've drawn here, and then I'll just rough in the interior partitions
As you go?
as I go. And the easiest way that I've found is to get them all in, like say if I know there's going to be maybe 5 or 6 walls along this run,
Yeah.
I'll put them all in, but I won't bring them all the way out. I'll just stub them out. And then when I start with the laser, I go from one to the other, to the other, to the other, to the other, and I end up with the whole line.
I got it.
And then I can just go right down the line and set the dimensions for everything at once.
And when you did your initial assessment and walkthrough, you would have determined the wall widths in that case. And so as you drew those walls out,
Yeah.
interior 4, interior 6, whatever it is,
Yeah.
and then you would have drawn those to avoid changing them later and then having to update the dimensions after the
Yeah,
fact.
you try that. Sometimes you can't do it.
Okay.
And sometimes you end up with dimensions that are off.
Okay.
And typically they'll be off by 2 inches.
So there's a clue.
Got a plumbing wall.
Yeah.
So as I'm doing my inspection, I'm also looking for plumbing fixtures like toilets, because that's an indication that maybe you're looking at a 6-inch wall or a double wall behind it. So it
Yeah.
just, you just keep these things in mind as you're looking. So when you do end up with a problem and the dimension doesn't add up, then you have a pretty good idea where
Yeah.
the error is.
Now, earlier when we were looking at the end wall, we determined that that's probably a stepped foundation, pony wall in Chief Architect, where there's maybe a concrete wall, furred wall, and it steps back in.
Mhm.
At some point, you're going to show us how you'll deal with that wall and measure that stepping so that it's accurate in your as-built, right?
In this instance, I don't know whether I'm going to use a pony wall or a double wall.
Okay. Whatever's easiest and
Whatever's
gives you the most
easiest and
accurate.
gets me the most accurate representation of the area. There are a number of ways you can do things in this program, and you pick the easiest one there is.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Well, let's continue on and frame out the structure and get your dimensions on here.
okay. All right, so in this instance, I'm going to double check just to make sure that my dimensions are set up the way I want them. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to locate objects, and I can see that I'm on surfaces here for my wall dimensions. And my text style is something that I reset so that I can basically keep the dimensioning for the as-built independent, because I like to dimension different things. So I want this on a separate text style and size. So, okay, I've got that where I want it. The other thing that's very important is to make sure that the temporary dimension defaults are also reset, because I don't want to be dimensioning to surfaces with my standard dimensions and then have the temporary dimensions dimensioning to the frame.
So you want them to be in
I
sync.
want them to be in sync. So I'm going to be looking in here to make sure that the surfaces are located. Also that I'm locating surfaces when my windows and doors are highlighted as
Okay.
well.
Okay.
Okay? So
Now,
then-
these temporary dimensions only display when you tap on an object versus a permanent or a manual dimension when you actually
That's
then
correct.
place those.
That's correct. And I use the temporary dimensions to locate the windows and doors.
Yeah. So the nice thing, as I understand it here, since you're measuring the interior space, you want to go to the surfaces. We just checked that in your dimension defaults, so those are going to the surfaces. When you run your manual dimension, it will go to the inside of the wall. And then also, your temporary dimensions match that. So if you were to tap on a wall, it will show you that temporary dimension going to the surface, and there's really no question or out of sync issues with those dimensions.
Correct. Yeah.
Little
So
tip for
now,
you.
now it's just a question of putting the dimensions in and getting things tuned up. So we just use our automatic dimensioning tool. You can use the automatic interior dimensioning tool if you wish.
And
Now-
you just tapped in the room and placed your
Place
automatic.
the automatic dimension. Now I don't typically use those dimensions because they throw dimensions everywhere. And the other thing is, if something is dimensioned, I usually like to get it correct right off the bat.
So when you do your dimensioning, this tool, the automatic interior dimensions, places the dimensions. You are a little more picky about that, and you're very proficient at your dimensioning, so you'll run those in a manual.
I'll run the dimensions manually.
Okay.
Yeah, and the reason is because, as I say, I like to, when the dimension goes in, is when it's actually set.
Okay.
And if I see a dimension that's there, I might assume it's already been set,
Got it.
and it'll introduce an error into the process.
Could you just show me real quickly how you might dimension one of those walls
Sure.
in your approach?
Let's just see if we can get rid of those.
Okay.
And in my approach, what I'm going to be doing is something like this. I'll come across here, like this, and then I might come across here like this. I can get this to, there we go, like that. Now, obviously, those are both the same. But in the situation when you're in the field, you don't know that.
You've
Okay.
seen crooked walls.
I've seen out of square conditions. It's not a question of crooked. It's just an out of square condition, and you like to be able to locate those things. So you're
Okay.
going to be taking some dimensions that the automatics simply won't cover.
So this room's maybe 70 feet long. How many dimensions will you take across that room to make sure that you have a square condition, do you think?
From this room, there'd be 3 from the far wall here to the stairs, probably 2 on the intermediate indentation, and then 2 on the far area,
Okay.
just to make sure.
And really the purpose is just to make sure you've got a square.
Well, if it's not square, then there's nothing I can do about that except make a note that it's out of square.
Right. Important for somebody
It's
to know about
important
that.
for somebody, if somebody's going to be remodeling it, it's nice to know what kind of condition you're dealing with.
To avoid the
So,
surprise at the time.
yeah,
Okay.
you want to give the builder you're working for, or architect, designer, as much information regarding the structure as you can.
Yeah.
So
It looks like when you ran those manual dimensions, that's really about as fast as running them automatically, and you have more control over it in that case.
for me, it's about control.
Yeah.
It's not about speed at this point. It's about control and accuracy.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so at this point, we go to work with the laser, and we just start taking the dimensions across,
Okay.
and we locate all the walls. We'll be taking all the dimensions that we need to create this space. We're going to try for an accuracy plus or minus 1/8 of an inch.
1/8? Okay.
That's what we're going to try for.
An
If
eighth.
if we can get it, we'll get even more accurate.
Okay.
Because the laser equipment from Leica is very accurate, and they can get down to a 1/16 of an inch.
Okay. Now, you've got your computer set up here. You've got your laser on here. Are you going to do one measurement, walk back to your computer, and Bluetooth enter it or manually enter it each time? Or tell me how you do
This
that.
machine has a 64 register memory.
Okay, well, what's that
So
mean?
what that means that I have 64 entries in memory
Okay,
that I can use. So I can take as many measurements as I want coming through here.
okay,
It'll display 4 on the screen at any given point in time.
okay,
So if I take a minimum of 4 measurements as I'm going,
mm-hmm.
then I can do 2/3 of the building
Okay,
in one shot. If I want to use the memory, then I can do the whole run without having to come back and forth and back and forth. All right, so we've got 4 dimensions here. And at this point, I'm just going to go back and start putting some things in. Now, I've also noticed that I'm going from 18.3½, 18.3 and 9/16, 18.3 and 11/16. So the room's widening out. Okay, so it's only about 1/4 of an inch out. In a case like this, I might use the average. Take the 9/16. It's just not that far out that it's worth noting. Okay, so this dimension here is going to 18.3 and 9/16, and I'm going to move this wall to do it. The next set is going to be this in here. We'll take this part here. Now, what's important here now is to establish a point of reference. We have this located properly. I'm going to see if these 2 bump outs are the same, and I'll use this wall down here to set those over there.
yeah. Now, the measurements you just put in here, you took 3 or 4 measurements, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you show us on your Leica device how that history looks so we can take a look at it here?
Okay, there's the device.
So what we're looking at is a situation where your history is showing the 4 most recent,
Correct.
and you said it goes up to 64, and you're just playing that back as you go back into the computer
Yeah.
and type that in.
And there's a couple of buttons here on the Leica, and this one accesses the memory. So if I hit this, then I can run through the memory stack.
Okay,
And I said it was 64, actually it's 30. Made a mistake there, but still, that's a lot of
that's a lot of measurements.
lot of measurements.
You have to have that memorized up here a little
Yeah,
better,
yeah.
right?
Well, that's why I don't do too many of them. But I can toggle through these
Mm-hmm.
and get each one as it's going down. And when I'm done, I just hit the button again, and the display comes back
And then
up.
you go over and type them in. Some of these devices, possibly even this one has a Bluetooth interface.
Yes.
And as long as your computer has Bluetooth, you could just tap on the wall, hit the Bluetooth send.
Yeah. Now, the key here is many of the machines will send the current data, and these other items up here are not available for Bluetooth
Oh, in the history.
in the history.
I
So this machine will do that. I can actually call from memory, bring it into the primary register, and Bluetooth it in.
And why don't you use Bluetooth?
I find it to be faster to do it this way,
Okay.
for what I do, anyway.
Yeah.
The Bluetooth, recalling it from memory, put it in. I take 4 or 5 measurements, I put them in,
Yeah.
maybe more.
Well, it looked like you did those measurements in just a matter of a minute or two.
That's right.
And then you walked back over to the computer, and it was in another minute
Yeah.
or two.
Now, in this instance, we have the computer set up on a table. In the field, I have a stand, and I can just pick the computer up and move it wherever I need to
A
move
little
it.
TV stand or something?
Yeah, it can be used for TV. It's a music stand.
Okay.
It's the same stand that a keyboardist would use.
Right.
So that can be, when the computer's portable, when the computer is portable, then you just move it all over.
Okay.
And you don't have to walk back and forth.
Okay. So you're going to take those other measurements. We'll assume it works the same way. Can you show us how you're going to measure this end wall that has the stepping down on it?
Sure. The first thing I'm going to do, once I get that wall located on the far side, in this instance, I think what I'm going to do is use a double wall. And part of the wall is going to be a full wall, and the interior wall is going to just be a solid rail, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
If I want to use a pony wall, I can do that, but then breaking the pony wall and having the bottom part come down the way this shelf is can be a bit of a problem. And it's usually easier just to break the wall and use a solid rail.
Yeah. You're just going to do it the fastest way.
I'm doing things the fastest, most efficient way. If I have to change it later, I can. But it'll give the people that are going to be doing the construction or the design the model that they need to work with. So first off, we'll just use our interior wall tool, and I'm going to place it out here because if you draw it too close to the other wall, it'll eliminate the other wall. You can move it right up on top if you want, like that. Then I'm going to bring another wall in, and this is just going to be a partial wall, a half wall, and the wall type is off, so I'll have to change that. Okay, so we'll double click that, change that to an interior 6 wall, line it up, and then all we do is set our dimensions on that break, take the measurements for the break and the wall height, and we're done. First, we're going to take the distance here, then we'll shoot the height to the floor, and then with my tape, which I don't have, we'll take this distance here. Okay, so I've got it on the laser. Sometimes the laser doesn't pick up the smaller measurements, but this time it did. So I have the 3 measurements I need at this point. Can come back over, put it in.
Now, let's talk about how you're going to measure the windows. You've got no casing in the window, and that makes it a little bit easier, but maybe you could talk about how you'd measure this window, and if there were casing on the window, how would that be different?
The casing is simply a matter of a checkbox to add it or not add it.
Okay.
That's not really an issue unless you have some cabinetry between the windows, at which point the casing becomes important. Typically when I'm measuring windows, I will preset the default window specification to show the casing at the appropriate size.
Right, so you'll measure the casing.
I'll measure the
and
casing,
then
yeah.
set your window default to have that same offset on the window
Right.
frame, and then it comes in with the right measurements.
Yeah, and I don't have to worry about it every single window. The only
Exactly.
thing I have to do is to just keep my eyes open to make sure that the windows are, in fact, have the same casing on them,
Okay.
because there's no guarantee.
Let's take a look at how you're going to measure this window.
On a measurement like this, I'm probably going to use the frame right here. It's a sliding glass window. There are a number of different ways you can measure the window. Some people measure the glass. Some people measure the actual window itself, the operable part. I find that the most consistent way that I measure from frame.
From frame.
Because if the window is different size or different type, it goes from double hung to slider, there can be some discrepancies there. The frame is the frame, and that's what we use. So we'll just, in this case, there's no window coverings here. If there were window coverings, drapes, vertical blinds, whatever, it might make it difficult to use the laser.
Mm-hmm.
But in this instance, it's wide open, so we can just use the laser and target the appropriate spot
So you get the width there.
to get the width. Same with the height, and then it goes in.
Right.
Okay? Now, if you're paying attention, you'll notice that that window down there looks very much like this one. So we'll just do a quick double check to make sure. If that's the case, then all we have to do is adjust one window. We can copy that window and put
Right.
it down there.
And all of the windows look like they have the same floor to bottom, floor to top. How do you go about the measurements of the floor to bottom or the floor to top?
Floor to top is typically what we're going to be using, and that'll get a consistent elevation
Okay.
view. Floor to bottom will take care of itself if we get the window right.
Right. And so you'll shoot from the bottom of that frame up to the
In this
ceiling?
instance, I might use the laser. Typically, I'm going to use a tape on that one.
Yeah. And why is that?
It's simply an easier way to get to the information I need.
You don't carry a
I
step
can't,
ladder?
I can't reach the header up
Yeah.
here,
Mhm.
and I don't carry a step ladder. That would just be counterproductive.
And so your tape, you can just
My tape, I
flip
just
that
run up
out
the wall
and measure it.
measure it.
Yeah. Great.
So, and again, if there's something in the way that, like drapes or vertical blinds or something, then this has nothing to target.
Right.
So that's the whole thing with the laser, is you have to have something to target. Otherwise, you're back on the tape again.
Right.
All I'm going to do, go from floor to top like that. And it says I'm at 89 3/4. That's all there is to it.
Pretty easy.
Pretty easy. Now, I'm going to notice that these windows are all at the same. Again, I'm going to set that in one window.
Right.
And if I have to, this is a slider, so is this one. I can take any one of these sliders, make it one time, set all my information into that window, and simply copy it down the row and change the width and height as required and keep the same configuration.
Right. And the advantage there, once you have it saved, floor to bottom, floor to top, the width, it's a much easier and faster process to take that one window you've already dimensioned and then replicate it inside of
Yes.
the plan.
Yes, and you're going to find that if you have egress windows or something in bedrooms, they're typically going to be the same window. Not always, but typically. And like we see in this instance, where that window and this window are probably the same one. That one over there, probably that one over there on the other side. So just making one window, we get the whole run.
And you'll measure each one of those windows just to confirm that
I'll
they are
double
in
check.
fact.
I'll double check. But if they're off by a quarter of an inch,
No big deal.
no.
Anything under a quarter.
Yeah.
Al says anything under a quarter, don't worry about it.
We'll get some feedback on that, I'm sure.
Okay. All right, so back into the program, you're going to show us what you're going to do on that end wall, and then go ahead and put the window dimensions in as well.
We started out with a 9'9" and a 1/16 on this wall length. So we'll enter that. And that'll pull that down. Then this wall was put in as a solid rail, which it is there. And on the Newland Baluster tab, we have our height. And according to the measurement, we have 3'3" and a 1/16. And as long as I have the accuracy, I'm going to use it. 3'3" and a 1/16. That's the height. The next thing I have to worry about is the actual size of the shelf, and that was 8 3/8 inches. So I'm going to adjust a dimension here. I'm just going to use a temporary tag to do that. Take one of the dimensions, just put another extension on, and move this so that it's 8 3/8 inches, surface to surface. And let's see if I can just lock these two together, just like that.
That looks like a pretty fast way, Al. Are you able to look at that in 3D and confirm that it's
We'll do that. And if it
the
isn't,
way you've measured it?
if it
So you're just
isn't,
using
then
the
we'll
regular
do- there it
camera,
is.
you take a look at it,
Yep.
and yeah, it looks exactly the same. Okay, great.
And that's the fastest way, at least that I know. There might be another way.
Yeah, that condition looks exactly the way that end wall does, and by using the railing wall, that looked like a pretty fast way to do it.
Yeah. Now, there's other ways to do this, obviously. You could have just put a polyline against the wall, extruded it out, cut it,
Sure.
and been done. But then, if you frame the building, you have no framing.
Yeah, yeah.
So with this, we get the cutout that we need, and we can also put that window back there because it is a legitimate wall.
Right. Yeah.
Okay?
Okay.
So,
And then you go ahead and put the windows in, right?
yep.
Can you show us how you're going to put the one window in, and then maybe just your method of copying that?
Okay. Go back to our floor plan. And that window that we were looking at was right in here. So we'll just take our window tool. Now I'm looking at this project and I'm seeing nothing but sliding glass on the windows. So our default window is a double hung. So I'm just going to go ahead and change that. So I'm going to double click the window tool and go from a double hung, and I'm just going to use a left slider here. And this is where I would change the casing. Okay? So if I'm going to duplicate this condition that we have here, I'm just going to kill the casing on the inside. We'll take it off.
And if the
that's-
windows had a casing, in that case, you'd measure the overlap, and then when you are putting together the cabinetry, which we don't have any in here, you're going to get the wall space availability if that's an
Yes.
important aspect to doing
Yeah.
a kitchen remodel.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Don't want to have those boxes from the cabinets overlapping onto the windows. That's a no-no. All right, so I'm just going to take the casing off on the inside. Now, we're showing the outside. We can swing the window around to verify that we have no casing. Now, as I'm looking at this, we do have, well, they're totally unfinished, so there really isn't a sill or apron either. So if we want, we can take those off as well on the inside, and we end up with this, which is pretty much what we have. All right, so that's the default window. We'll place that window, and then open it up and simply match the width, height, and floor to
Right.
top that we took
That you just
from
measured.
the other side. We'll also notice that we have some Craftsman style on here, and we'll add that to the window as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Probably not necessary in all cases, but that would be a pretty simple change as long as you have that window
Yeah,
open.
it usually when I'm doing something like this, though, I do put it in just to let people that are going to be coming behind me know that if they are going to be doing something, they're going to want to match that.
Right, if
particular
they're adding
glass.
another window in
If
there.
they're adding a
it's-
room or something like this and they want to maintain consistency in the building, then they go ahead and
Right,
get the appropriate
Yeah.
nut and style.
yeah. Now, when you do your delivery of your plan file to, it's mainly builders that you do the as-built for, or also
Builders,
clients?
architects, designers, whoever needs an as-built.
Okay. Do you provide the 3D to them, the elevations to them? What's your deliverable?
The
that you're-
deliverable typically, one is the chief file,
Okay,
and I use layout pages to do. I have a 3 or 4 page layout
okay.
that I do. All right, so I've gone ahead and modified the window that we were talking about, and this is what I would show on the plan. The Craftsman has been inserted, and the window sizing has been modified. And floor to top, I believe, was 89 3/4. So we'll set that. And once I click OK, then I I have some temporary dimensions here.
Right.
Once I click OK, I have some temporary dimensions here that I can use to locate the window relative to the corner over there. Now this window over here, I'll do a quick double check on, and then get a distance to the outside wall, and then set that. The other window, I'll just copy that, and we can use Control-C and Control-V, or the copy and paste tool. Paste that there, reset the width accordingly, based on the measurement, and then get a distance between them, and have it set.
And the advantage here, using the copy, you've already put in the Craftsman, you've already put in the floor to top, floor to bottom information.
Yep.
And just makes it a fast process.
Yeah. And you can just very quickly just go right down the line and put everything in.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, great. Now, once you've finished those, there may be situations where maybe the ceiling is vaulted.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly not that case down here. But if the ceiling were vaulted, what's your process in doing that in the as-built measurement world?
For the as-built, when I get a vault, typically the first thing I'm going to do is put a text item in.
Okay.
And the text item is going to show the finished sheetrock height at the low side of the vault.
Right.
Okay. Then I can either show the finished ceiling height at the high side of the vault or the slope. Either one. If you want both, that's fine. But any of those two will give you the appropriate slope. The one thing to remember is if you do have a sloped ceiling, take Chief Architect's standard flat ceiling out. Otherwise you won't see it.
Another good tip. Now, when you're measuring the vault, you just use your laser and you go to the edge of the wall, measure up to get the ceiling, you go to the peak and
Same
do the
thing.
same thing.
Yeah.
So you don't necessarily even need your electronic level in that case, would you?
No, unless I can't get to the peak.
Okay.
If there's a big ridge in the way, it makes it a little difficult to
Right.
get the laser beam in the exact spot you want to get it.
In that case, you need to get a ladder and then...
Yeah, if you want to get up there and do that.
Got
yeah.
it. Yep, yep.
Or you can be on the floor with the laser and just watch where it's going, and hopefully you get a decent number.
Make sure there's no cats around when they chase the laser. Right? Okay. Well, what's left here, Al, that you would do before you leave the job site?
I would measure the exterior to the fences.
Uh-huh.
And what I'm trying to do is get a rough approximation of the house on the site.
Right.
So I'm going to get the site information from an assessor's parcel map, maybe, and then just do a site study.
Would you use, let's say that the assessor information may not be available, would you use Google Earth?
Possible.
Okay.
It's possible.
And
It's a little less accurate because it's not a straight down image, but typically anyway. But that's possible.
Right. And the other case might be you actually have surveyor data, and
Well, then that's the best you can get.
because you can import the surveyor data, they usually will give you a DWG file, and then you could just import that in and do your measurements and
Right.
location with that.
Right. But what's important from my standpoint is to label things to the fence.
Okay.
'Cause when I hit a project site, I don't know where the property lines actually are.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, what do you do when there's no fence?
Find a way.
Okay.
You find something.
So you might find, maybe in this case, there might be a property marker, run a string, and just get a dimension or something
Yeah,
off of that.
you try and get something there. There's going to be something somewhere.
Okay.
But you can't call what you're doing a plot plan.
Okay.
All right? It's a site study.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
you don't want to
really-
be absolutely wrong in that case.
Well,
and be
it's
liable for
it's
it.
better just to say this is an approximation at this point. The only guy who's going to be giving you the exact information is a surveyor.
Yeah. And do you actually, to kind of mitigate any liability with some of those measurements like that, would you put a disclaimer on your plans that you give to the client or
Anything
the
that's
builder?
delivered to the client has disclaimers on it regarding that.
Okay.
That and underground utilities, completely unknown, things like this. And then we also recommend that if somebody wants to locate the house precisely and get precise property bounds, then they contact a licensed surveyor.
Yeah. Now, in this case, we have a condition where the foundation is stepping and the stem wall goes below the ground. What do you do about the location of the stem wall or the footing in that case?
I don't worry about what's below ground. I
Okay.
have no way of knowing what it is.
Okay.
I will locate, if I locate the foundation, it will be simply the stem wall,
Okay.
and I will say so.
Yeah. You'll just make a note on
I'll
there.
just make a
that's-
note, or I will simply use lines and say that what you see is the bounds of the stem wall.
Yeah. What you see is what you get.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
And then the other important thing there is how high the stem wall is above grade.
Right.
Okay, so if you can get that information, that's great.
Mm-hmm. Now, is that just a text call out that you'll do, or would you go to the level of effort of adding terrain?
It's a text call out unless the customer wants it.
Okay.
I'm not doing terrain unless the customer asks.
You're there
specifically for it.
to go in, get the job done in the most efficient way because you're getting paid by the job maybe, and you want to make sure your deliverables are what are required, and really you don't want to spend any extra time on the job
Well,
site.
what you just said, what's required?
Yeah.
What is the customer asking me for? That's
Yeah.
what I deliver.
Okay.
If the customer says they need that, that's what I'll do.
Okay. Well, Al, I want to really thank you for your time today. We appreciate the tips in measuring as-built measurements, and thanks so much for sharing your approach with us.
You're welcome.